There are so many things to say right now about Afghanistan. I would like to make a few remarks and make sure that we have enough time for your questions, because this is obviously the issue of the moment. It's on all of our minds. And what we really need to do more than anything is set the conditions for success in Afghanistan with the president's decision whenever it arrives. And I first and foremost want to tell you that I do think that we can succeed in Afghanistan, and we can still succeed in Afghanistan. I think a lot of the discussions that we've had concerning the political environment in Afghanistan and the nature of the military challenge tend to obscure what it is that we actually need to do in Afghanistan in order to succeed. And what we have to do is first neutralize and defeat the enemy that is fighting us in Afghanistan and is fighting the government of Afghanistan. That is to say, render the Taliban and the Haqqani network incapable of not only conducting violence, but conducting violence with the effects that they're having on the ground, intimidating the population and preventing the government of Afghanistan from actually developing the kinds of institutions that can help the people of Afghanistan. That's the first thing that we need to do, and that is a task that we can undertake. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. The second thing that we need to do and that we need to recognize is that we need to establish for the Afghan people what it is that they want from their government. And I think we have a lot of images of Afghanistan as a very poor country, the fourth or fifth poorest country in the world. And for those of us who have had experience in Iraq, watching the extraordinary reconstruction that our military and our U.S. civilians have done to help the Iraqi people and create the Iraqi state, I think we're all a little bit, shall I say, flabbergasted when we arrive in Afghanistan and see the extraordinary difference between the amount of development that is required in Afghanistan and what was required in Iraq, which after all had an industrial economy prior to the war and where we were essentially engaged in rebuilding rather than building for the first time. Over the years, we have tried very hard to develop our way out of this insurgency. That is to say, to provide development funds for the purpose of minimizing the insurgency, strengthening the government of Afghanistan, and seeing to it that the Afghan people have an alternative to the life of poverty that they have. And of course, this is an important undertaking, but you can't develop your way out of an insurgency. You actually have to perform a large counterinsurgency strategy with all of the tactics, techniques, and procedures that entails, all of the civilian military effort that entails in order to be able to defeat the insurgency and satisfy the Afghan people. And what the Afghan people need and want right now is different from what the Iraqi people need and wanted, because they don't necessarily need a perfectly developed 20th century country. They need some very fundamental things as human beings living in an insecure society. They need security first and foremost. And most Afghanistans do not live in an environment where they feel secure. And that is what they are looking for from their government. And quite frankly, now there are elements within the government of Afghanistan, such as the Afghan police, that ought to be providing security for the local people of Afghanistan, but which actually contribute to their sense of insecurity through the way that they practice their law enforcement, shall we say. And what we have to do is make sure, first and foremost, that the people of Afghanistan have a secure life. And I think for those of us who spent time in Iraq and worked with Iraqis, we know how important it was for the United States to make a commitment to securing the Iraqi people, but then also to follow through on that commitment by providing day in and day out the kinds of security that they needed in order to protect themselves both from malign elements of their government and enemy groups that were fighting amongst them, causing disorder and causing a degree of uncertainty that made it impossible for them to survive in any peaceful way. What we need to do first and foremost in Afghanistan is get that degree of security. And in Afghanistan, what has caused the insecurity among the people is much less the active campaign of violence that we saw in Iraq, but much more a quiet campaign of intimidation, violence, assassination, and kidnapping that has made it very difficult for them to function at the village level, at the community level, at the district level. And so we are not really talking simply about stopping the violent acts of the enemy, but we're talking about taking away from the enemy the kinds of powers that they have to intimidate the population of Afghanistan. And quite frankly, also to impose on the people of Afghanistan or provide for them a set of services that is actually better than the set of services provided to them by the government of Afghanistan itself. The Taliban is essentially a government in exile. It has governed Afghanistan before, and it sees itself as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. It therefore performs many tasks that government is expected to do, and that the Taliban did perform as a government, not only appointing shadow governors to provinces and to districts, but also taxing the people, providing security, so-called, in the form of checkpoints and patrols along roads, providing a sense of justice for the people, not good and healthy justice that the people want, a rather stark and harsh form of justice, but one that nevertheless allows people to settle their disputes and get on with their lives in a way that is much more certain than what would happen to them if they had to take their disputes or their legal claims to the government. The Taliban also has a system by which it holds its officials accountable to the people by having an ombudsman committee in some areas of Afghanistan that will meet, hear popular complaints against their rules and leadership and their essentially shadow government officials, and see to it that those who are abusing the power of their positions are actually removed from their positions of power. That is what the Taliban does, and those are the services that it provides. And so the Taliban works in these two ways to win the population away from the government, by creating a sense of disorder and chaos, by doing targeted assassinations of government leaders, of tribal leaders who might protect a community in a traditional fashion, and then by moving in and through first intimidation and then the provision of services, establishing control in a particular area. And perhaps the most emblematic area of all in this type of process is the Arghandab district outside of Kandahar, but we see it also in Helmand province and other places throughout the south where the Taliban actually operates. So what we are trying to do in Afghanistan, what we must do in Afghanistan, is provide a level of security for the people that will allow the people to be able to function without Taliban security being provided in the form of checkpoints, intimidation, and essentially payoffs. And then what we have to do is see to it that the people have one other service, I think, that the Taliban provides for them, a way of adjudicating disputes within rural areas in order to be able to have the basic economic, family, and social life that allows the society to function. Those are the things that the Afghans need first and foremost. And then, over time, they need the creation of jobs and the creation of industry and the creation of agricultural development, the kinds of programs that will take generation or more to provide to Afghanistan, but are not critical in the short term for success in defeating the insurgents because they do not fulfill the needs that the people see of their government. A lot of the Afghan people have not actually had a close relationship with their government. In fact, they've been in a state that has been more or less ungoverned for 30 years. So their expectations are lower from what the Iraqis had in a highly centralized, socialized state. And so as we approach our strategy in Afghanistan, we need to conduct a campaign against the enemy so that it doesn't have safe areas, sanctuaries, and the ability to either attack the population or to control the population in areas that are important to the Taliban, that are important to the population, that are important to the government, and that are important to us. That does not mean all of Afghanistan. In fact, as you know, as we look at the insurgency in Afghanistan, it's largely confined to the Pashtun population. The Pashtun population is essentially confined to the southern belt of Afghanistan. And within the Pashtun population and within the areas that are in Afghanistan, south and east, there are, in fact, key cities and key districts that are very important to control because they allow access to people, access to roads, access to goods, because they are critical terrain for operating within a city, since, in fact, Afghan enemy groups don't really operate inside a city or a village or a district, but in the areas surrounding them in accordance with cultural norms. And then finally, areas that are important because of their symbolic value to the Pashtun population and to the Taliban movement as a whole. And so as we look at where we need to be in Afghanistan, we actually need to reallocate our forces and, quite frankly, encourage the Afghans to reallocate some of their security forces on these key areas, such as Kandahar, the spiritual capital of the Pashtun population, a spiritual capital of the Taliban, and an area that has been really almost denuded of forces from or by the coalition and, quite frankly, by the Afghan army. I'm proud to say that we at the Institute for the Study of War will be publishing a paper soon on Kandahar. Its author, Carl Forsberg, is here with us today. And it is actually essential that we understand what has been going on here in Kandahar, because it's one of the reasons why General McChrystal needs as many forces as he does, is that a place like this has been left uncovered, left very vulnerable to the Taliban. And over the years, the Taliban has been able to consolidate its position of control in this area and in the areas surrounding in a way that could have profound strategic consequences for us, for the government of Afghanistan, and for the people of Afghanistan as well. We need more troops in Afghanistan. And we can try to slice it any way we like. We do not have enough forces on the ground in Afghanistan, period. No matter how we allocate them to priority areas, we have really under-resourced this fight. And it shows on the ground, and it shows because we're never able to concentrate enough troops anywhere to achieve decisive effect against the enemy, or even, quite frankly, to secure more than a tiny pocket of population at any given time. Because we do not have forces concentrated, because we have to sort of disperse them either over large geographic areas or over the entire country of Afghanistan, we never create the kinds of force densities that allow our troops to perform the counterinsurgency tactical tasks that they need to perform. Denying the enemy sanctuary, going in, protecting the population, going door to door, establishing relationships with the population, figuring out who the bad guys are, and figuring out how to get them out and keep them out of communities. Something that we saw in Iraq, something that, quite frankly, we learned a lot about in Iraq as we went through the process of the surge. What we saw is that a clearing operation in Iraq was something that took months and months and months, and it's something that our forces in Afghanistan have been trying to do in 2 to 3 weeks in order to be able quickly to move on to another spot. Well, that's not a good way to do things. We can see the effects on the ground in Afghanistan as both the Taliban and the Haqqani network have been able to establish themselves or retain sanctuaries while our forces have been operating in cities such as Lashkar Gah in Helmand or Khost in Khost province. We need to stop this. And in order to do that, we actually have to concentrate forces and mass forces in such a way that they actually have the desired effect, protecting the population, something that we know how to do. And not only do we need to do that, we need to do that in more than one place at a time, because if we focus on Kandahar without focusing on Helmand, if we focus on the south without focusing on the east, we essentially leave our forces and the Afghan population vulnerable to shifts within and among enemy groups to new areas of terrain. And I think one of the things that we learned very much during the surge experience in Iraq is that we have to make sure that we don't engage in whack-a-mole, that we do actually consolidate gains in key areas, prevent the enemy from coming back, and that we do not drive the enemy into other bits of key terrain while we conduct our operations in one bit of key terrain. The negative example of this perhaps might be the Talafar campaign within Iraq, which was fantastically successful at securing Talafar using counterinsurgency principles, but was the only operation of its variety in the 05-06 year, leaving both Baghdad and Mosul quite vulnerable. We can defeat these guys. We can defeat the Taliban, and we can establish enough security for the government of Afghanistan to come in and to establish itself. But we also need to work very hard to mitigate the malign behaviors of the government actors within Afghanistan who focus sometimes on using their power to protect themselves, their families, and their personal financial interests at the expense of the state. We think that this is hard, and I agree, but it's something that we can do given the amount of resources, leverage, and influence we ought to have within Afghanistan. The United States and its coalition partners not only control many troops and much terrain, but also a great portion of the funding that flows into Afghanistan's budget and its coffers. So what we do need to do and what we can do is limit that behavior and use the resources and leverage we have to limit that kinds of malign behavior. See to it that the government does not engage in the kinds of corrupt behaviors that antagonize the people and allow the Taliban to flourish. I'm going to leave those remarks there and just emphasize once again, we can win. We can win this. The McChrystal strategy, I believe, is quite sound and is still appropriate post-election period. But in order for it to succeed, General McChrystal needs forces, and he needs a decisive amount of force. Anything less than a decisive amount is only going to protract and prolong the amount of time that our forces actually have to spend in the field in a campaign that is succeeding or failing much more slowly than it should. Thank you.